Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing?
So there's a ton of lag on this, which is sort of horrific. But hi, I'm Sophie Takagi Kaner,
Hi, I'm Kevin Vibert.
and welcome to Writing Fiction Across the Void. We are here on our living room floor.
We had a much more professional-looking setup,
We did.
and it didn't work at all. So we had to move closer to our router because my only Ethernet cable is about 2 inches long. And here we are.
So here we are. We're on the floor.
Yeah,
but
let me
that
change
keeps
that
it
angle a little
cozy,
bit.
keeps it intimate.
Uh-huh.
Hope that you can hear us. Don't look at my mic setup. It's embarrassing. Okay, so if I keep looking off screen, it's because I'm also checking my computer and checking the chat and everything. So that might happen a lot, but
And we're going to do our
welcome.
best not to touch the table because I just watched the screen shake like a whole lot.
Whoops. Okay.
We're learning. We're building the plane while it's in the air.
Yeah, so this is going to be like a little bit haphazard. We've done stuff like this before, but we had other people managing the technical stuff. But because of social distancing, we can't do that.
But because we're roommates.
We can do that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, welcome everybody. We're super, super pumped that you're all here. And we really, really wanted to do something to build community and feel like we're reaching out to people, like people can engage with each other. And our skills are around telling stories. So we wanted to share that with all of you. And as I think we've mentioned before, I think it says it in the description, the Discord, which you probably have already joined, is going to be a big part of this. So if you haven't already joined that, make sure that you do. There's that link in the description box. And part of that is not just because, we'll be doing group activities and stuff, but also we're just kind of hoping that this is a way for people to connect and hopefully stay in touch and work together. And, in a time when we're not going to be able to see our friends every day, I think it's just a nice way to feel more connected with people.
Yeah, so when we were talking about designing this, for those of you that don't know, as my day job, I'm an English teacher and I teach a creative writing class. So I've done this before, but not for this many people. But even in a relatively small group, my style tends to be splitting people into small groups, having them work together, so that you can really get to know the people that you're working with. So we're hoping that either you have a group that you already know that you want to do this with, or if you don't, if you go to the Discord, we have a channel. Let me pull it up now. We have a channel called Group Search that you can go check out, and you can post what you're looking for in other readers, what size of group you want, and hopefully you, those of you that don't already have a group, can kind of find each other.
So you can do that at any time. You don't have to do that now.
Yeah.
Not important. Yeah, I'm excited.
Me too.
Yay.
This is great.
So yeah, be prepared to chat with other people, to join up into groups, and to get writing. And we hope that everybody comes out of this with something.
Yeah. I don't know. Should we get started?
Let's do it.
Is it time? All right. Let me bring this up. As I said before, I'm an English teacher, and that means that you have to forgive me because I've made a presentation. There we go. All right.
At least you're qualified. I'm not qualified.
You're not.
I'm just here for the ride.
Sophie
frankly.
made a few slides of this presentation, and you can tell which ones are hers because they're the ones that clearly aren't qualified. Let's get started. So today we're going to talk about story propellant, or how not to get stuck. After this, we're really interested in asking you all what you want to hear about. We'd like to do one of these a week. And we'd love to base them around what you all want to learn, but I think that this is one of the first things that's really, really useful, because so often what people say and what people are thinking about is I don't know how to start, or once I start, I don't know how to finish it. I don't know what I'm actually doing. So what we wanted to give you today were basically tips for how we have found, especially in our process.
There was a question about taking notes.
You may if you want.
I wouldn't worry about it too much.
No.
And we will be uploading.
We're gonna upload. Yeah, we're
presentation.
gonna upload the presentation. We're gonna upload. There's an exercise that we do during it that we'll upload too, so you can have all this. But if taking notes helps you, you can absolutely do it. It's up to you. So our purpose today basically is to give you some tools so that if you feel yourself getting stuck, or if you know you tend to get stuck when you write a story, these can help you ahead of time. These are things that once I learned, I was able to finish stories much more consistently. So hopefully you find it useful. Hi, we've said join the Discord a million times, but you should. Also, at the end of this stream, we're going to have time for questions from you all. The questions that we pull are all going to be from the channel on the Discord called... I think it's called Live. Yeah. It's called Live. Yes, it is. So yeah, if you so make sure you sign up for the Discord if you have questions, because that is going to be the channel that we answer them on.
Yeah, so I just hopped into that channel. Thank you for reminding me. I was fully on the wrong channel. But I'm in the right channel now. So I'm trying to keep an eye on it. And it might be a little bit slow because obviously I'm a little distracted by also trying to present stuff. But I will be checking every so often.
Cool. All right. So let's get started. This is a quick review of terms you probably learned in middle school English. Please don't run away. Because I know that you probably know what these things are, but we need to establish them super fast. The words conflict and stakes probably look pretty familiar to you. The conflict, we're basically looking at the problem that drives the events of a story or story arc. For the stakes, we're looking at what can be gained or lost as a result of the story's events or conflict. These two definitions are what I would call reader's definitions. And in general, I think partially because not everybody ends up writing fiction, school is very, very good at teaching you the reader definitions of things. It teaches you how to read. It teaches you how to analyze. What it does less is teach you how to write and how to look at these things as a writer. So these definitions, I'm not sure are all that helpful for us if we're thinking about how we're going to actually write a story.
Right, because you actually have to approach stories pretty differently as a writer versus as a reader.
Yeah. So my redefinings are these. So those are the reader's definitions. My writer's definitions for conflict is it's story go-go juice. And for stakes, it's what you hold hostage so the reader freaks out. The second one is especially really important. And I want to talk to you about why. There's a really interesting thing that our minds do when it comes to stakes that I want to demonstrate to you right now.
With me?
To you. Yeah. Are you excited?
I'm so excited.
We can pretend that I didn't show you this earlier, but it worked when I did.
Show me what?
Show you what? Here's a weird thing about stakes. I'm going to tell you two stories, okay?
Me?
You.
Okay.
You. And
he's going to tell me two stories.
And the several people watching. So story A, I want you to imagine there's a city and it's called City A, and you live in City A, okay? And in story A, there is a monster that lives underneath the water on the coast of City A, and in 5,000 years, that monster is going to create a tidal wave that will destroy the city.
Okay.
Ancient god will awaken and destroy the city in 5,000 years. That's the idea. High stakes. Now I want you to imagine story B. You sit down in your math class. You're still a resident of City A. We can even say the ancient god's still there. But you sit down in your math class and someone tells you that you have a math test coming up in 90 seconds that you have not studied for.
Oh my god! I should not have yelled into the mic.
No, that was far too much.
I'm so sorry.
So what's really...
But the stakes were so high.
Right. Well, I mean, what's interesting is that more than high, the stakes were immediate.
They were fast.
Right?
Yeah.
Which you can relate to. So...
to being fast.
Yeah.
That's true.
So the reason that I point this out is because I think a lot of the time people worry, even when they're telling a story about themselves, that they need to make the stakes super high. They need to explain like why it matters. Why is this universe shaking, right? But the thing is that for the most part, we care more about than high stakes are immediate stakes. Yeah. We care if something's going to happen right now. That doesn't mean that you can't write the story about the ancient god awakening in 5,000 years, but that ancient god better be doing something today relevant to what's going on 5,000 years from now.
Right.
The stakes, even for a long-scale conflict, need to be broken down into smaller, immediate things to help keep you moving along.
And you can often see that, like, visually if you think about all those, like, action movies where you can see, like, the bomb countdown, like, happening right in front of you. And, like, it always works because you're like, oh my god, I have 7 seconds left, and that makes everything feel so much more urgent.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you actually write it? How? There are two. I basically just want to say this to point out, we're going to show you one method today. We're going to talk about a certain kind of outline today that I find really helpful. But I wanted to point out that that is by no means the only way to write. There are a lot of really great writers that write organically. They go where the muse takes them, write each sentence and decide in the moment what the next sentence will be. Some writers are amazing at that. For a very long time, I insisted on writing everything like that. And then suddenly I needed to bust out a fairly long script every 2 weeks, and it just didn't work anymore.
So how do you teach someone how to write organically?
There are certain exercises that you can do, but they're not relevant right now. Writing organically is something that I think different people approach different ways, and there's lots of really interesting theory behind it. Today, I think we're going to talk mostly about outlines, because one thing that I think is really helpful to think about is, even if outlines give you the heebie-jeebies, they're really, really useful as writing prompts. If this weird curve thing looks familiar to you, cool. And if it doesn't matter, either way, I'm going to tell you what it is. This is the basic, what people often call the basic shape of a plot, right? And when you've learned this in middle school, high school, whatever, you may have learned that the up and down, the y-axis, I'm not a math teacher, leave me alone. You may have learned that the up and down is rising action. The word that I prefer to use is tension.
Pause for one quick question.
Yeah.
Somebody's asking if it is possible to do organic and outlined in one story.
Oh, absolutely. I would say that honestly, the organic and outlined combo is really more of a spectrum than anything else. So, I mean, really.
It's not so much of a binary.
No, not really. For example, in a lot of our scripts, or a lot of our outlines, embarrassingly, like during a major moment, instead of actually writing what happens in that moment, I will write a shortcut like, an action scene happens, someone says something smart, etc., right? And those are moments where I'm expecting when I get to that spot and I write it, I can let the organic take over, right? I still do the structure because, as we're going to talk about in a sec, one of the nice things about the structure I'm going to show you is that it comes up with a coherent story every time. Is it the only story? No. But does it come up with a story every single time? Absolutely.
And it's like a good way to think about it is as a skeleton.
Yeah.
Like you will at least have something that hangs together and functions. And then, of course, there's a ton more you have to actually do with it from there. And just because you have the skeleton doesn't mean that other things might not develop organically. I don't like this metaphor anymore.
Oh, good.
It was yucky.
Did you hear the one about the skeleton growths?
But it just gives you a frame to hang everything on.
Yeah.
And that's something it can be really useful for.
Real quick before we move along, I do want to say, when we're talking about tension here, what we're basically saying is how worried is the audience. So if you think about the story that we told about the person who has the math test in 90 seconds, right? It's not that there's a lot of action. This person does not need to fight 80 ninjas in order to get to their math test, right? It's that we are very, very worried in that moment before the math test. So that is a moment of high tension, right? What we want to show you today, and when we're done with this, we're also going to put a blank form of this for you to use up on the Discord, is basically a 5-point outline that has worked for us a million times. Once we're done, we'll talk about some interesting things that go along with it. But first, I want to cover the bare bones, right?
The bones?
The bones. The bone.
Like a skeleton?
Like a skeleton with terrible growths.
With growths. But they're organic.
They're organic.
They're organic.
Free-range skeleton growths.
Okay, so what I find really helpful a lot of times is to reverse engineer from stories that I'm already familiar with. And so what we're going to do today is take a story that we're familiar with and reverse engineer the outline from there. And honestly, this is a way that that we work often. Like, I think a lot of our scripts have kind of been this, of like, we'll take a story that we really like, that we know works really well, and then we'll kind of reverse engineer it. Like, how did that work? How did it get from one place to another? And then apply that to our own story. So that's kind of similar to what we're going to be doing today. We'll use a story we probably already know. Juno stealing the case in the murderous mass.
Well, hello.
This slide is not sponsored. By me, I guess.
Before we set this up, I'm going to give you that so that you can tell this wonderful tale.
Okay.
And
Do I just click it?
Yeah, you just click it, and it's okay. It's not going to blow up on you, but I am going to take that from you.
Oh, good luck. Okay. Please hold. All right. So, that's plugged into another thing. So, Juno Steele and the case of the murderous mask. And I've clicked it. Okay, so what we're going to do is, keeping in mind that prior slide, right, with the rising tension and the major story beats, we're kind of going to reverse engineer from the story that I hope we know, basically the major plot beats, and how we get from one point to another. So, what we begin with is, my name is Juno Steele. I'm a private eye. We get the call from Sasha Wire. Have you heard of the death mask of Grimpothuthis? And we get to either you take this case with our assistance or you and I start talking about what asteroid you might want to live on. So all of that stuff is the introduction. It gives us our main character who we're going to be following. We learn a little bit about him and we kind of get the lay of the land. We get the situation. He sort of gets the call. And we learn some other stuff about him. I think he brings his gun with him, so we sort of know that he's a sharpshooter. So next, Rex arrives and sweeps Juno away. So this is where things start to get moving, right? We've already established who we are, where we are, what's going on, and we start to establish movement, and tension is starting to rise, right? We get to the Kanagawas. There's he looks at the crime scene. There's the balloon full of pasta bolognese, and we have the question of whodunit. We meet with Cass, and we have this sense of probably whodunit is Cecil. Cecil was here all night. Min grounded him. So what that is though we have to do something. We're moving somewhere. We've got a plan. We're going. After that, something changes.
Gasp.
Don't ever say gasp, because I will. You cannot stop me. So this is where we hear from Cecil. Cassandra does the prosthetics very well. He has an airtight alibi. It couldn't have been him, so everything is different than we thought. And this is what we call the rope is a snake. And this comes from one of your students, right?
Right. I would love to take credit for this, but I'm not that smart.
I love it.
Yeah. No, I have a student who I taught in a creative writing independent study once, who, when I was kind of talking to him about how I use this system, described what I had previously said was something goes wrong as the rope is a snake. And I think that is absolutely genius.
Yeah. Like it's such a strong and memorable thing.
So, Ad, if you're out there, thank you.
I also just, I'm like such a story structure nerd, and like I'm always kind of trying to reverse engineer stories, and it's like it's really fun to note that one in particular. I think when you're like watching a movie or a TV show or something, and you're like, oh, this is the rope is a snake. Like this is the moment where we realized the thing we thought is in fact not the case, and everything is different. And sometimes it's just like, oh, the time limit is different than we thought, or oh, we were chasing the wrong. Or what was it? Oh, I was watching Charlie's Angels the other night, but I had this in mind, and I was noticing the rope is a snake part when it turns out that the people who employed them are actually the villains, and I think they really lampshade it in the movies. They're like, turns out he's the bad guy, and that's the rope is a snake. So anyway, couldn't have been Cecil after all. Cassandra does the prosthetics very well. So moving forward from there, then we get to our next major moment is the showdown with Cass and Min. There's the struggle with the gun, and there's the reveal where Cass admits, I pushed him, he fell into the case. And that, as you probably can guess, is the climax, right? This is where all the tension has escalated to. And after that, we get these closing moments of the gentleman, I think it's time to take my daughter away now. Cass gets arrested. And then Juno and Rex make a lot of accusations when they kind of realize that Min actually has been behind all of this. She says, theoretically, if only you had the evidence to prove it. And that's our conclusion. So you will notice we're missing a lot from the story. Possibly all of your favorite moments from the story are not included here.
Someone in the Discord asked a question that I think is very relevant here, which is, drum roll, please, where'd it go? Should we create the plot before or after we create characters? And I think that in general, the question's about, what do plot and characters, so how do they coexist when you were trying to create something in this way, right? One of the things that, as Sophie just said, is that mostly it's the major character moments that are missing from this version of the plot. Right. We might talk about that a little bit more some other week in detail. As for which one you start with, in my experience, it really just depends on who you are. I know great writers who go very, very plot first, and I know great writers who go character first and then ask themselves a lot of questions about, okay, what are these characters going to do in this situation, right?
Yeah, it's just like what is exciting to you in this moment.
Right.
When you sit down and you're going to write, is it just like, I'm going to write a story, in which case, okay, maybe you start outlining like this, or is it that you've kind of had an idea for a character, like sitting in your mind for a while, and you want to get them down on the page, okay, then you're going to start with a character, but there's no one answer.
Right. So,
Switch.
change places.
Switch.
This is basically our 5-point outline, those 5 steps, right? The thing that I want to think about here is, so the thing that kind of got me on board with outlines, because I absolutely hated them.
Yeah, you used to hate them so much.
I used to hate them
I'd be
so
like,
much.
why don't you write an outline? You'd be like, never.
Yeah, what a fool. But the thing that finally got me there was when I realized that you don't necessarily need to look at an outline as a box or a cage, right? An outline is not necessarily a prescription that you create and then you absolutely have to stick to. One of the things that I like about this form of outline is that what you basically have are 5 writing prompts. You have 5 questions. And if you can answer those 5 questions, you have the skeleton of a story.
Yeah.
The nice thing about these 5 questions is that it, believe it or not, takes relatively little effort to string together moments from these that are coherent. Good is a different question.
Right. So, like, don't worry too much about the other stuff right now.
Yeah.
Because all we're doing today is how do we make a skeleton? And yes, you will notice, that's not a person. Like, I keep using this metaphor. Like, There's a lot of other body parts that you need for a functional person, but you also need the skeleton in order for the whole thing to have something to hang on.
Right. Or you create a human puddle. Those moments, if we look at them, this is basically how I break it down when I think about it. For your introduction, you're looking to hook your audience's attention, start up close to the conflict. You can begin to set up your characters by showing what they want, what they can do, what their problems are. When you get to we have to do something, a plan is made or a response begins, someone might be driven into action. Honestly, part 2 is most of your story.
So you'll notice when we reverse engineered, like, there was a massive gap between, like, oh, Rex arrives and sweeps Juno away,
right,
to, oh, it wasn't Cecil after. Like, so much stuff happens in between there.
Right. Part 2 is basically the last 3/4 of part 1 and the first half of part 2, right? It ends up being a huge chunk of it. The number 3, the rope is a snake, is if you're going to forget any of these steps, that's the one. And it's also the absolutely genius one. If you've ever had the experience of watching a show on Netflix and you say, I'm going to watch 2 episodes, and then suddenly it's 4 o'clock in the morning and you have no idea how you got there. What I find is that a lot of shows that we call bingeable, what ends up happening is that the writers are very good at rope as a snake moments, especially at the ends of episodes.
Yes.
So you
and then,
have
like,
to
the
keep
snake
going.
turns into something else.
Right. We'll give another example of that in a minute, but you're basically looking at unforeseen circumstances arise, situations more complicated than we thought, character makes a mistake, something like that. The plan doesn't go as planned. For the climax, again, another English class word that you've probably seen a lot. If we're thinking about it like a writer, and we're thinking about plot as our go-go juice, and we're thinking about stakes as the thing that you're holding hostage, right? At the climax, this is the moment. This is the moment where the stakes are most at risk. Whatever we could get, this is the moment where we would get it. Wherever we could lose, this is the moment where we would lose it. Right?
This feels so, like, I don't know, like football movie to me. Have I ever watched a football movie? I don't know. But, like,
you watched a lot of Friday Night
like,
Lights.
That's true. I did watch Friday Night Lights. That was a good show. But it's like everybody huddles up and they're like, all right, it all comes down to this, and like it's the big game.
Yeah.
Yeah. That moment.
And then for your conclusion, it's a wrap up, plot threads that need wrapping up, relationships that need managing, and you want the conflict to be addressed, though not necessarily solved. In a lot of stories, the conflict is solved, and that's great, right? We write a series of fantasy stories in which, at the end, a lot of the time, the monster's dead. Hooray! But sometimes it's gray. What matters to us is not that the problem is solved, but that something has happened on the front of the problem.
Yeah, somebody asked, what do you call the thing after the conclusion, or is that also conclusion? It sort of doesn't matter for the purposes of this skeleton, I would say, because, again, if we go back to Murderous Mask, like, we put as the conclusion, right, it's time to take my daughter away now, and all of that stuff. But there's, like, a quite pivotal scene that happens after that, as you may recall. But that's actually not part of the skeleton, the very basic skeleton of this story arc. Even though all of that stuff is plot relevant, character relevant, takes us into the next episode, but it's not what makes this hang together. So it doesn't like super need to be addressed.
All right. Looks like we're having some streaming issues. We looking okay?
We said to no one.
I'm checking as I'm saying it. Give me a minute. Jerk. Okay, it's a little jerky, but it seems like we're doing okay. Cool. So let's keep going, and then we'll get to our questions at the end. But first, I set us up for a real big problem, which is that I said it's very, very easy to put together a coherent story from these 5 parts. I want to put my money where my mouth is, and I want us to all do that together. So if you aren't on the Discord, get on the Discord, get on the live channel. Basically, we're going to ask for you all to submit answers for these 5 points. There we go. This document I'll end up putting up on the Discord too. And as we go, we're going to add to each of these 5 points and hopefully create a story that makes sense, right? Is it going to be good? It's going to be a train wreck. So it depends on your opinion of train wrecks. Exactly. But it will make sense. That I can pretty much guarantee you. And it'll be recognizably a story. Okay? So first off, we need an introduction. We need a character. I find that one of the best ways to think about this right away is we need somebody who wants something, right? So somebody give me a character who wants something. If you have a conflict of some kind, you can throw that in there too. Put them up on the Discord and
in the live channel.
In the live channel, and when we see one that jumps out to us, we will write it down.
All right, so we're starting our introduction.
Introduction.
And I know there's going to be a little bit of lag here. Okay, so I'm looking at the channel. So what I want to see is a character who wants something.
Mm-hmm.
What you got? Okay.
I think we saw one.
I saw one. This one?
All right, here we go.
All right, this is from Shriyazizim. Teenager who wants her exams canceled so that she can finally paint. That's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, because there's a lag. I know that people are still submitting, even though we've already chosen, but...
One thing that I'd like to do as we move on to 2, right, is so what we have here is there are definitely stakes, right? There are personal stakes, which are often even better than big stakes. Is there a way that we can make these stakes immediate? Is there a reason that she needs to paint now, right? Is there a reason that that this is the moment? Can somebody give me a reason that our teenager, we should also have a name for us. If you want to throw in a name, that's great too.
Ooh, yeah, name.
Needs to paint now, so exams are really in the way.
I just saw a really funny suggestion. Sorry. That could be a sense of urgency.
I like the one that I'm seeing right there.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Seeing a good suggestion. Do you want to read out who that's by?
By Tristan. Painting is the only way to keep the demons at bay.
Demon attacks every single night. The world will not survive. Or just she will not survive. If these exams are not canceled, she can finally paint, right? Let me zoom this in a little bit so you all can see it a little better. All right. We have our general problem. We have to do something. We need a plan here. So it sounds like this person knows what to do about the demons, right? Painting is the key, but the problem is a personal problem. Exams are in the way. So what is she going to do to get rid of the exams?
Oh, here's a name that we could use also.
Verona.
Verona. That's from Aethrin.
Verona has one R. Verona. All right. So what we need next is a plan. She starts off and does something to get her exams canceled.
Oh yeah, they're literal demons. Yes.
Literal demons.
Yes, they're literal demons.
Oh, actual. Yeah.
Yes.
Horns.
Okay. Sorry. Can you say one more time what?
We're looking for Verona to come up with a plan.
Okay.
Something to happen to push towards the exams being canceled.
Okay. We got a lot of stuff.
That's exciting.
That's dark. Oh. That seems like a plan.
Our initial conflict was getting the exams canceled, so I wanted to be around that.
Okay. Say that again.
Our initial plan, remember that the initial conflict is that Verona's got the demons figured out, right? What we're trying to do here is she's trying to get her exams canceled. Doesn't mean we're done with the demons. I have a suspicion the demons are going to come up in a minute. I like that one down there. 2 down.
This one?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So this one is from Kieran. Release rats into the school. Naturally.
There we go. That seems like a suitable plan. I don't think we need anything else there. Verona thinks let's cancel school by putting a bunch of rats in it. But the rope is a snake.
The rope is a snake. Oh, my favorite.
The rats don't work for some reason. Here's something that I do often to help tie things together. If you set up some pieces early on that you want to come back to, the rope is a snake is a really good moment for it. So what I might suggest in this moment is if we're looking for something unexpected here that makes it so the problem's more complicated than Verona thought, bringing the demons back, this is probably a good time for it.
Mm-hmm.
So what goes wrong? Her plan is to release rats into the school, and for some reason that doesn't get the exams canceled. She could make a mistake.
I love that. No?
We get the demons involved in there somehow.
Okay. Whoa, 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 whoa.
All right. Okay.
That's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So from Astronaut, the demons possess the rats.
And of course, the demons probably want the exam to go through, right? Because if the exams go through, she can't paint. The demons are free.
Right.
Right? So now we're down to the climax. We are down to the make or break moment, right? This is the question of, is she going to be able to paint? Will exams be canceled? Does anybody have an idea for what our make or break moment is? Oh, I like that so much I want to write it down.
You can just write it. We can just write it down as a detail.
Yeah.
This is from M. The principal is a rat king. Okay, so this didn't answer our question. We just liked it.
Principal's working with the demons.
Okay, but the climax is what we're really looking for here. That was just a bonus.
We're looking for one moment. It all comes down to this. Probably need to scroll all the way down.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot that I like here. you want to pick one?
No, I think you'll do better.
Okay.
Oh, that's cute.
That is cute. Cool. All right. Yes, I
Yeah, I
like
like
that.
that
And
one.
that's a good demonstration of what we talked about earlier about mixing the organic with your outline, right?
Yeah.
So,
This is from Liz. Verona paints a portrait of the Rat King and somehow defeats him with the painting. This is really good, y'all.
So what I meant by this is a good example of combining the organic and the outlined is that this is a moment that in one of our scripts I would probably leave my outline there and just say, all right, I've got all the pieces. When I show up to write this, I'd better come up with something good for that portrait. The other piece of magic that you can always do is, let's say I'm writing it and I get to this moment and I can't think of anything good for the portrait. I can always go backwards and change things in the setup earlier on to give Verona some interesting things in this moment, right? So remember that just because you're writing the story from beginning to end, if you choose to write the story from beginning to end, it doesn't mean that you can't go back and change things to help set up your ending a little better, right? Now we need our conclusion, which is we need the conflict to be addressed.
We don't have to solve
We could solve it.
everything. We could, but it's not necessary.
Right. So our initial conflict, remember, was Verona wants exams canceled so she can paint so that she can get rid of the demons. We need that to be addressed somehow.
So we have to somehow answer the question of, does the exam get canceled?
Does the exam get canceled?
So that she can paint.
Yeah, and I guess the corollary question of do the demons go away?
Yeah.
Yeah. Y'all are really good at this. These are really
these
fun
are
to read.
Amazing. Somebody just said the squeakquel.
I like a lot of these. Do you want to pick one, Seth?
Um.
Pretty much all the ones I've seen would work.
Yeah, I liked. I mean, that one's kind of sad, but I like
right.
it.
I want let's combine.
Oh wait,
that.
no, I think that's from somebody who I already picked.
Okay,
So maybe I should
pick another one.
Wait, I love that, but it's not relevant. I mean, I think that would work, right?
Mhm.
Well, does that have anything? I don't know if that comes from the climax.
I have a hunch. Let's put that in so we can demonstrate something else too.
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll go with this one. This one's from Ray. The rats bring a plague, and she skips exams.
All right, excellent. So I think what Sophie and I were just talking about was basically, is the plague totally out of nowhere, right? Does it have anything to do with what actually happens in the climax? And sometimes what we'll do at this point is we'll kind of like massage the climax or the conclusion a little bit to make it a little bit more relevant, right? So if the demons possess the rats, just right off the top of my head, maybe we do something where when Verona defeats the Rat King, the rats all go back to normal, but they're still rats, right? So they still get everybody sick. There are things that you can do to kind of tweak the setup in order to make the conclusion more satisfying. But even before we do that, if we look at the story that we have and we tell it like this, Verona wants her exams canceled so she can finally paint, because painting is the only way to keep the demons at bay. To get her exams canceled, Verona releases rats into the school. Unfortunately, the demons possess the rats, and the principal's a rat king, so that's not good. Verona eventually paints a portrait of the Rat King and somehow defeats him with the painting, but because all the rats were still in the school, the rats bring in a plague, and Verona gets to skip her exams to paint.
Not only does that hang together, I could imagine it on the Cartoon Network.
Yeah.
Like big time.
Right. And this was completely random suggestions from a chat of how many people we got in there?
132.
132. So yeah, it was just completely random suggestions from 132 people, right? And it's still recognizably a story.
Yeah, and I also want to note something. I mean, and of course, this is kind of on the macro level because there's 132 people in here, but that like once you put down number 1, you start to have a lot more ideas for number 2, and once you have 1 and 2, wow, there's a lot of directions you could go in for number 3, and so like the further you go with it, the more generative it sort of becomes itself, I think, which is another thing that's very nice about having a structure to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are closing in here. This is what we're bringing in the Discord for. You're stuck at home, so you might as well do this work. I want you to, if you haven't done it already, go to our Discord, introduce yourself, form a group. Once you have a group,
Make sure you go into the group search channel for that. Don't do that in a different channel.
Right. Try making a 5-point outline for a story yourself. I put in there, if you hate it, you never have to do it again, I promise.
Because this is just one way
Exactly.
that you can write a story.
And we're happy to show you plenty of ways. One of the things that I think you always need to keep in mind whenever you're taking any kind of creative writing instruction is ultimately the thing that we can teach you best is what works for us. And we can do some research and figure out what works for other people, but we're kind of flying a little blind when we teach that. So I want you to try this. If you try it and you hate it, you never have to do it again. Okay? Write a very short story. My challenge for you is to set up the stakes in the first sentence. Even if it's a clunky sentence, your first sentence is literally like, there's a math test in 90 seconds. If Verona doesn't cancel the exams, the demons will take over, right? In one sentence. And when you're done, share what you make with your group and harvest the praise. Bring it all together.
How long is a very short story?
I would recommend a couple pages, but one thing that I really want to like hammer in as we do this is what we'll be doing each week for as long as this lasts is basically giving a general place for all of you to land and to look at, so you're talking about the same thing. But for my money, the real work is going to happen in your groups. That's where the exciting things happen. So most of all, I want you to be able to put a group like that together. So I say a couple pages, but ultimately, whenever I suggest anything, the rule that should always usurp that is whatever your group wants to do. I will give you suggestions that I think are best practices, but talk to your group, see what you're interested in learning, see what you're interested in doing, and kind of make the rules together.
Yeah, and again, like we really do want this to be not just about generating stories, but also about building community. So like, I really, really hope that you can find people to work with in groups and keep writing together.
Yeah, absolutely. So then we will put this up on the Discord a little later. I want to make sure we still have a little bit of time. We have about 15 minutes before we wrap up. But I want to make sure to thank Sarah Baum for putting together the Discord. We didn't know what we were doing.
And also for helping us come up with this
Come up with the idea, 100%.
In the first place, yeah.
So thank you so much, Sarah. We want to thank Noah Symes, whose name you might recognize. He put together the logo for writing
So
Fiction Across the
fast.
Void very fast. It's incredibly charming.
Love it.
And Ryan Meyer, who gave us some tips to help us with our streaming setup today.
Thanks.
So thanks. And now we want to close out with some questions. So if you have questions, that is now what the live channel on our Discord is for. So head over there, ask us some questions for the next 15 minutes. We're happy to answer them. We change our view here.
And we probably won't be able to get to all of them, but we will do what we can.
While we're waiting for the questions to roll in, one thing that I think is probably worth saying is that the 5-point outline for looking at a character arc is something that we think about for a whole 2-parter, but it is something that you can break, you can expand and contract into sort of as big or as small as you need it to be. A whole season of a TV show tends to follow the 5-point outline, but one episode of a TV show also follows the 5-point outline, and one exciting scene also often follows the 5-point
the
outline.
questions are coming in.
Cool.
Did this one? Is this type of one okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you want to do this one?
Yeah. So question from Scully. It was the aliens. What inspires you both most creatively? Sophie, you want to take that one first?
I pull a lot from stories that I like. Something that I do a lot is I will watch a movie or a TV show and have a lot of feelings and go, okay, this thing made me feel that way. I want to do that. How can I do that? How can I make my audience have that feeling? So I often do that. And honestly, I feel like I said, it was in that interview we did. Like you inspire me a lot creatively. Like, working as a team. It doesn't work for everybody. It works great for us.
Yeah.
So Kevin is my answer.
I think that my answer's very similar, which sounds like I stole it and I'm cheating.
If you just were like, not Sophie.
What inspires me most creatively is getting as far away from Sophie as possible. But I think Sophie and I both have kind of developed this instinct towards when we watch things or when we read things, we kind of have this impulse going where if something seems fun, we just want to do it. We just want to take it. And that's why a lot of our stories they start off as riffs on other stories, and then as they go through our filter and we adapt them to make them work for our story, they become kind of their own thing.
Yeah.
All right. Noah's pointing out a question for us from earlier. Any suggestions on balancing the rope as a snake with not wanting to undermine the stakes?
Or the snakes. If I'll see myself out.
Without wanting to undermine the ropes. I think that ultimately this is something that kind of goes outside of the scope of just this outline. One thing that we haven't really talked about is the fact that this outline will get you a coherent story, right? It will get you something that is recognizably a story. It might not get you something that is satisfying. So in terms of figuring out how to do that without undermining the stakes, just keep in mind what your audience is worried about, what you got them worried about. You can have a twist where the stakes completely change. A rope as a snake moment can make what we thought was a small interpersonal problem be a planet-wide problem, right? That's okay. But remember that you got the audience in on the interpersonal problem. So even as you are solving the planet-wide problem, you'd better have things to say about the interpersonal problem, right? Hopefully that makes sense.
This one we can answer really fast. It's from Olive. I have a question about the Juno Steel arc. Did you create Juno as a character first, or did you make the story first? That one's easy. It was the character.
Yeah. But I think that even with him, we started off with very broad outlines.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was we've talked about this before, but it was like, we want a bisexual male hero.
Yep.
That was the whole thing. And then it was make him a noir detective.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where he came from.
Yep.
Do you ever like to jump straight into some dialogue? That's from David H. Films.
Yes. 100%.
Yes. That works great.
Mm-hmm.
How do you force yourself to continue working on something you want to write but have lost enthusiasm for?
Usually I find that if I've lost enthusiasm for something, that means that I've kind of lost the conflict or the stakes. If something is not pushing the story forward in a way that makes me want to know what happens next, I tend to lose interest, right? Because there should be some sense of discovery in you as you're going through and you're seeing how it happens.
Right, you're finding out what happens next, and if you don't care what happens next, why would you try to write it?
Exactly. So I would say, check initially, are your stakes immediate, or is the problem so far off that your characters are just kind of chilling out waiting for something to happen? Because if that's the case, you can really feel like you're killing time. And if you're doing that, it's hard to keep going.
I also think that you take a lot of inspiration from the page turner, the thriller,
yeah.
like anything that sometimes are from genres that people consider like cheap kind
mm-hmm.
of, but they hook you, like they make you want to find out what happens on the next page.
Right.
This is an interesting one from Sash. How do you communicate the core messages of a story clearly without being too ham-fisted or too subtle? So that one I think is interesting because I don't know, like that kind of makes it seem like a story is a medium for conveying a secret message kind of, but like a story is a story,
mm-hmm.
really. And so I don't know, in a way I kind of just want to say like, tell the story and the message will happen based on what the story is. Like, it's not a coded way
Right.
to say something, or at least in my opinion, like, that's not what I think we try to do. It's not that there is no message, it's that we were trying to tell a story.
Right. So I think that for us, one of the first rules that needs to happen in order for a story to work is, can we make this into an engaging story? So even if we have a mission that comes before the outline, we want to have a certain kind of character, we want this kind of development happen for the character or whatever. When we're designing the plot, we're making sure that the plot is relevant to that thing that we want to put in. That way, we don't really have to worry about whether it's too ham-fisted or too subtle, because it's just part of the story.
Right, it is what it is.
Yeah. Oh man, I can't read diagonally. Can you read that? We have Ray Not Today Logic says, how do you make your characters so darn compelling?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Sophie, how do we make our characters so darn compelling? I'm glad you like them, but
make them all like me, I think, is sort of generally.
Okay, I do that, but that's not. I don't think that's a good thing to
Just
do.
in general, an across the board tip.
There are a million ways to do it. One tip that somebody, I forget where I learned it, but I did not come up with this, that helped me very early on, is that audiences really like a character who is good at something. Think about all the shows that we are willing to watch a complete jerk episode after episode after episode just because they're good at something, right? That is not the only way to do it, but by giving us some kind of hook into the character early on so that we want to keep going, you can continue to really bring us along that way.
I would argue that our characters also generally have something major that is a handicap, something holding them back in some way.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
And that generates conflict itself within the character, and often within the plot as well. And then it's just like, I don't know, being observant. I mean, not just of me, but like of people, mostly of me, but of people in the world around you, and like which of their characteristics do you find compelling or funny or charming? And like, like you also, like, we certainly don't write realism
Right.
at all. And so like we tend to heavily weight towards characters who are charming. Like, we have a lot of characters who are charming and charismatic in some way because that's fun to hear about, right? Like, you don't, even though it would be more realistic to have a lot of dull people, that's not a lot of fun, so like, it's a lot of times you want to draw from life things that really spark your interest and put those in the character. I mean, they work too.
Right. So the question from a different Sophie.
Yeah, not me. I did not sneak into the chat and say this.
I don't know. I wasn't watching you the whole time. Maybe is thoughts on the hero's journey and other story structures. The answer is yeah. If it works for you, 100%. They didn't really work for me. The thing that I like about this outline is, again, it gives you some like specific prompts to go through, and all those prompts are relevant to the conflict and the stakes. But if you find that another system works for you, that is always the number one rule, right? Throw out anything that anybody tells you if you found a better way.
Yeah, this is just what we talked about today is just one option. It's not even what we do every time.
Right. I've found also from teaching this to other people that this tends to be something that helps people who have a hard time just getting started, right? So give it a shot. But if you find something else works, that's great. Oh, wow, the sun is...
Ooh.
Uh-oh.
Sorry.
Can I just... No.
No, that sucks.
That's not... All right, it's done.
I mean, we could answer this. It's not really about writing, but...
Let's try to stick to ones that are about writing.
How do you approach writing a podcast compared to normal fiction? That's a good question. I mean, because you have to start, and this is something that we definitely learned over time, but like, you have to work within your medium. And so we know that people are going to be only hearing what we're creating. And so everything has to make sense within an audio medium. And that means that often dictates what happens in our plots or how we build our characters to some extent, because it has to be comprehensible in that way. So something that I think we've probably talked about it before in, I don't know, some commentary or something, but we had some early Second Citadel episode that we were trying to come up with a monster for. And the original idea was for it to be like a mirror monster, a reflective monster. And then we were like, that doesn't work. Like, we won't see it. This will have zero impact. Even if we can get the point across, it won't like hit home in any kind of interesting way.
Right.
And then we were like, what would be the audio equivalent of that? And that's how we came up with the Echo Beast.
Right.
The idea being it's the audio equivalent of a reflection, but we had to change the plot because the plot didn't really work for audio. So you have to be thoughtful about your medium. And apart from that, it's similar to a play in a way.
Yeah, very, very dialogue heavy in that way. I will say I was never very comfortable with my own ability to write dialogue until I suddenly had to write literally nothing but dialogue. So writing a script is a really good way to get better at it, and expect to get better at it, right? You can't expect yourself to be as good as you want to be ever, but especially to start.
How do you deal with lack of ideas for ways of taking a story from one point to another? I really think that this is what this type of structure is useful for.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times when people think they don't have any ideas, what they mean is they don't like any of their ideas.
Right.
And I would say that especially honestly forever, but especially if you're just trying to get started, don't worry about it too much. Because like, I don't know, writing is just not an inherent natural talent. It's a thing you practice. You know, if you like play an instrument, it's not like you picked it up and you were amazing at it. And even though writing doesn't feel like that, it feels a little bit more magical in a way. Like, it's just something you have to practice. So like, don't worry about if you hate your ideas. Write down whatever. I mean, look how silly our outline was that we all made together. Like, it was just whatever people were throwing out top of dome, but it hangs together as a story. And then you get practice writing that story, and then you do it again for another one. I love that question. I don't know if you have an answer.
We have from Tess, are there any rules in fiction that you find are made to be broken? How do you break them? One thing that I try to think about when it comes to, as we continue these and we tell you there are certain things that a story needs to have. So, for example, earlier we said a story needs to have conflict. Is that completely true? Is the right answer, right? Ultimately, I find it really, really useful if you look at different elements of a story's, what comprises a story, and you ask yourself, what is this actually for? Tension, for example, is for making the audience want to continue, right? It's the page-turner feeling. If you have something else that creates the page-turner feeling that is not tension, you can get away with it. There's some great, really, really funny novels that ultimately don't really have a plot, but you keep reading because they're so funny that you don't want to stop. And are those bad novels? I don't think so. I think that they found a successful replacement for what we would consider completely necessary for a story. So in terms of what rules are made to be broken, I think anything goes so long as you understand why you broke the rule, what the point of the rule was, and you have a suitable replacement for it. You have a good reason.
This is a good question. I've seen it elsewhere. This almost might be worth its own workshop.
I think that is, yeah. The question in question is, how do you approach episodic structure versus a single work that stands on its own?
Yeah, that's from Noah, but I think I saw similar questions elsewhere. That is a fantastic question.
Yeah.
I think it deserves its whole own lecture.
If that's something that you're interested in hearing about, we're going to open up. One of the things that I want to make sure that we do is take requests for what you all want to hear about next time. So if that's something that you want to hear about, say that there.
Do we know where we want those requests to go?
I don't know at the moment. Once we figure it out, we could put it on the Discord.
Okay, yeah. So just put a pin in that. We'll find somewhere for you guys to put requests because from here on out, we want to know what you guys would like workshops on. So we will take requests on that. Do you want to wrap up? Do you want to take more questions?
I think it's time for us to wrap
Okay.
up.
Yeah. Okay. I know there were a lot of questions we didn't get to. That was always going to happen. But this is not the end. There will be more. Hopefully, if you haven't already, you can go into the group search channel. I know we've said it a zillion times, but like this is a really important part of this to us, is that you guys find groups, that you work together, and that you really generate something. So I hope you will do that if you haven't already. And I'm so excited about everybody having joined us today. Like, I feel so much more like, I don't know, connected to people than I did after a week of being at home.
Absolutely, yeah. One last thing that I want to announce is, and we'll see where this goes on there. All right, we've received word that we can have a request channel.
Okay, so there will be a channel made to put requests in.
There is a submit channel on the Discord as well. Sophie, can you click on that real quick? Basically, what we're using that channel for is if you write something over the course of the next week before our next stream next Saturday at 2:00, if you write something over the course of the next stream that you think demonstrates some of the things we talked about today, is really good at establishing tension, is a really good rope as a snake moment, anything like that, you can drop just a chunk of it in that channel. And next time we're going to start our stream off just by reading off a couple that jump out to us that we think are looking really good. So that is the submit channel. Anything that you feel comfortable sharing with everybody, you certainly don't have to do that. But if you want to, it's there for you.
Yeah, so we'll pick something for next time. And I think that's it.
I think it is.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for joining us. This has been wonderful. We're really pumped about how many people showed up and how active the Discord has been. And we're excited to see what you come up with.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll see you next week.
Happy writing.
Yes.